I'll start the conversation the way most conversations start in Sydney these days around housing. It's something that it's been a big focus for you since you've come into power. We had a state budget that delivered historic number in terms of social and affordable housing. We've seen some massive reforms, and we've got Kirsten Fishburn here who's leading a lot of that. Despite all that, 18 months on, in your words, playing catch up, your sense on how far we've come and how far we still got to go?
Well, thank you, Adam. I think that's really the crux of the issue. If you ask young people in particular what their leading concern is, they'll say housing, a home to live in, and what's the leading cause of them leaving a beautiful, amazing city like Sydney, Western Sydney in particular, they'll say housing. But can I just start by really acknowledging the Western Sydney leadership dialogue, and Chris in particular. When I was first involved in politics and graduating school, there was a definite understanding that Western Sydney would grow, but I believe there was a conspiracy amongst governments of different persuasions that it would grow without infrastructure. And Chris has done an incredible job to say that the two have to be hand in hand. If we're going to have growth and opportunity in places for people to live, it has to have amenity, it has to have public transport, it has to have world-class schools. And I can't think of anyone that's done more to promote that idea and insist on it from the leaders in the state. So I think that's incredible, well done, Chris, and you should be very proud. Look, housing's a big challenge for us. It's not an easy one to fix. I think if it was easy to fix, it would have been done by someone earlier than me. But having sat down with the Minister for Planning and Departmental Secretary Kirsten, who's here, we thought, well, look, it'd be very easy for us to blame interest rates, inflation, access to finance, the difficulty of building in Sydney, local councils, the federal government. But in reality, Sydney produces 6 houses per 1,000 people every 12 months. Victoria produces 8 and Queensland produces 9. And the difference, just in net terms, is the difference in lost opportunities for young people. And we're losing twice as many young people as we're gaining every 12 months. And that's notwithstanding the fact that we are the entry point globally for people that move to Australia. We take 38% of inbound migrants. Some stay, many go, many who are second and third generation are up and leaving. And we've had interstate migration before in Australia, but it's usually been older people moving to Queensland as they get into retirement age. We are losing young people now. The people we want to start businesses, join firms, coach football teams, be part of their communities, and they are going. And unless we can solve this riddle, Sydney's going to be fighting with one hand tied behind its back.
One of the noticeable shifts that I've seen, and I'm interested to get your take on it, is more willingness, especially from the community level, to accept the need that this is a crisis, that we do need homes. The term YIMBY, which probably wasn't heard of a couple of years ago, has now become mainstream. Is that something that you're proud of, that there is now a broader acceptance that we do need to start acting, we need to start looking at different ways of addressing the solution? How proud are you when you hear these groups, YIMBYs, in certain areas which were opposed to development over so many years, that are now waking up and saying, yep, we need to play a part in this?
Well, look, when it comes to housing, I'm not proud about it because we don't have the runs on the board yet, if I'm going to be honest. Yep. We've got a long way to go and we're still behind the other states. I think that we've liberalised the rules, particularly with Paul and Kirsten's decision to introduce the Housing Delivery Authority, which is going to fast-track development approvals, not just the DAs but the rezonings. It's controversial amongst some local councils, but if we just keep saying no to housing, we're in big trouble in the state. So we've got to get the runs on the board. I'm aware of that. The proof will be in the pudding.
Do you feel that the message is being heard, though? I mean, the word developer was a dirty word a couple of years ago. I think there's more acceptance now that they have a role to play, and it's not seen as, there's no stigma attached to it.
Yeah, to an extent. I think the previous government deserves credit for putting David Chandler in, cleaning up the industry, having a strong cop on the beat. That, alongside our housing liberalisation reforms, making it easier to build, they've been good. Both of those two things together have been, I would argue, virtuous decision. One by our government, one by the previous government. It means that particularly when you want financing for off-the-plan developments and the capital's got to come in before the building's even built, I think that there's more confidence now, particularly for young people, to say, yep, I'm going to take a spot in that building because I'm aware that New South Wales has got strong, enforced, regulated rules. And so, yeah, we've got to share some credit with the previous government there. I think they tried to sack David Chandler at one stage, but they brought him back, so they deserve credit for that.
Christopher mentioned Rose Hill. We've been publicly visible in our support for it, even more a couple of bruises from Mark Latham at a parliamentary inquiry because of it. Regardless of the outcome, and largely out of our hands now, one of the, I think, positive things that emerged from it was the sign that you and your government was prepared to look at things a little bit differently, to show some imagination, some ambition, to be a bit bold. Has sort of the way things played out changed that perspective, or is that still, are you sort of still striding in that view that you need to start looking at different ways to address this issue?
No, I think it's a great idea, and I think it could be a game changer for Sydney. It's the last bit, because it's been a racecourse for such a long time, it's the last bit of completely uncontaminated land in Western Sydney close to rail lines. We're spending $24 billion on a new metro, and I hear the calls from the dialogue about metros. We've got to put this in perspective. When the previous government built 10 metro stations over 12 years, I opened 8 more, but let's be honest, that was Gladys's legacy. So that's 18. Not counting any of them, right now in Sydney, we are building another 25 brand new metro stations. It's the largest spend in public transport infrastructure in the history of New South Wales. So one of those will be Metro West, running straight out to Parramatta. And frankly, I think we need bang for our buck. If we're going to spend that kind of money, then you do need density levels that come close to Paris, London, New York. I don't think that's a big step for an international city like Sydney to take. I think that we're ready for it. And I think it'd be a fantastic place to live, because you'd be 10 minutes from the city CBD, maybe a bit longer, but not much longer, and 5 minutes to Parramatta, the first and second biggest employment zones in the state. What an amazing place to develop and grow and sort of plan from scratch. You could see one of our big international developers grabbing that site and building something that was incredibly special.
We're still hopeful that the federal government will come to the party with some of those metro announcements sometime soon. But on the topic of the feds, we're launching our federal government advocacy document tomorrow.
Good, give them a hard time. Lay off me for a little while.
That was my next point, because I know you've been having your conversations with the federal government this year on a number of issues. Transport, education, health, probably the three that come to mind first and foremost. I know education and health is a conversation still happening and haven't got to a landing yet. But I wanted to know from you, how are relations with your federal counterparts? And two, is there anything you're looking to take directly to the PM in the lead up to potentially March or May next year?
Well, look, I mean, it won't surprise anyone to know I'm very invested in the Albanese government. I want them to win. I want them to win as the Premier of New South Wales. I want them to win as a Labor Party member. They're my views. So we'll do whatever we can. And we've worked really constructively in a whole bunch of areas. Obviously, the areas that we don't agree get a lot of media and headlines. But my obligation and my responsibility is to New South Wales. I didn't get elected as the Labor Premier of the state. I got elected as the Premier. And notwithstanding who's in power in Canberra, my job is still to defend and represent the interests of New South Wales. And we've got sharp elbows around the negotiating table, because I think we need to. And I've watched Western Australia and Queensland, two very parochial states, grab an increasingly larger share of the pie in those negotiations with the Commonwealth. Doesn't matter whether it's Labor or Liberal, going back a long way. I'd like to see some of that parochialism in New South Wales. We've gone from about 92 cents in the dollar for GST distribution to 87. That doesn't sound like a lot. It really adds up, particularly over a 10-year period. And no, I'm not knocking Western Australia, but everybody
there's
here
no one here
pays...
from Western Australia.
Oh, good. Well, I will knock them. But everyone here pays taxes. It all gets sent to the Commonwealth. Western Australia is on track to become one of the richest governments in the world, on par with oil-producing countries in the Middle East, and for almost the same reason, because they dig up natural resources and export it. So, you know, we've got a more diversified economy. We've got a big base of industry. We're service-led. We've got access to parts of the economy that are not dependent, international economy, that are not dependent on natural resource extraction. And to effectively take money out of New South Wales means that you're putting a lot of your eggs, the nation is putting a lot of their eggs in the resources basket, and I don't think that's wise for the future. So we're just going to keep fighting for our state. We need it.
Yeah. On that topic, there are a couple of federal policy matters that we've been fighting on behalf of our partners and for the state in Western Sydney. One being specifically the policy around international students and the effect that that's having on our tertiary partners. Two, making some noise around the airport, that it's 2 years away, and wanting to ensure that Badgerys Creek or Western Sydney International is best placed to be able to succeed from day one, and that may include some regulatory changes to allow for an open skies designation. Do you see the the state government playing a more increased role in advocating in that space, or is it too hard, or where do you see that you or the state government may be able to sort of insert itself a little bit?
Well, I mean, the first issue first, I think you really have to think through what the implications of international students and their rate in Australian universities, what they are, what they do for the economy. I think that there needs to be a discussion about what the impact of inflation is if, for example, the Dutton opposition were to win government, what that would do to the labour market at the moment, which is already at full employment. And I bet you there's many, many firms and councils and businesses in the room that find it very difficult to get skilled labour in their particular industry. We have to think about what that means for us as an economy. So we've been clear about that. So is Victoria. We'll advocate on behalf of the state. And, these are big issues. What you won't hear from us is, I'm not going to get into this idea that we use immigration as an excuse to stop progress in the state, or to try to say to the population, look, the New South Wales government doesn't have any responsibility for immigration, but Sydney's full and therefore we can't afford any further infrastructural changes. Ultimately, I don't have responsibility for it, but we still have to make the changes for a growing economy.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in this room would have got their start by moving to Australia and massively added to the productive base, the energy, the excitement, the opportunity by moving here. And I think that's got to be part of the discussion as well.
In that space around investment attraction, industry attraction, Bradfield has pointed out earlier a massive opportunity for Western Sydney tied to the airport. Do you see a sort of more increased role? We had a conversation with the New South Wales Treasurer not too long ago. We said that we see that as a real opportunity for us and something we want to be more active in. Where do you see sort of the next 2 years in terms of encouraging or being more engaged with industry around the airport and making some more deals and bringing in international corporations into Bradfield and beyond?
Yeah, well, it's a huge opportunity for the state. We've got Ken Morrison here, and the Bradfield changes that we've made, we think are going to make a big difference. Strip away a lot of red tape, encourage more capital investment in that part of Western Sydney. It's a big opportunity for the state. This is part of our balancing act at the moment, particularly when it comes to labour, which is in short supply and very expensive. We need to be in a situation where we're balancing new manufacturing opportunities in Western Sydney alongside our massive housing build, or what we hope to be a housing build, alongside record investment in public transport infrastructure. There's only so many people in the construction sector to go around. Sometimes it's a question of sequencing, but we're working very hard to get that right so that we can have our cake and eat it too and deliver on all of these things.
On the topic of manufacturing, one of the things that you sort of were very clear about, and for us very positive news around improving local capacity in manufacturing, leveraging procurement process, particularly within transport, and things like trains and buses being made in New South Wales, hopefully in Western Sydney. Are we starting to see that sort of start to play out? How long before we start to see more trains and buses rolled out from factories in Western Sydney?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some challenges there. Our most important obligation is to make sure that the buses are on the road and the trains are on the track. So we've had to extend the life of the Tangara contract, but we're seriously committed to it. Part of the reason is de-risking an element of our economy which is very dependent on coal exports. The single largest export for New South Wales last year and the year before that and the year before that was coal, $45 billion. Now, every country we sold coal to has indicated to us or to the world that they're going to rely less and less on that export, on that commodity for their energy production. So they're putting us on notice that they want to buy less of our number one export. That means we have to fill $45 billion every single year with other goods and services, and we have to look after industries and people, communities in the Hunter and in Western Sydney. So we've got good skills, we've clever manufacturers, we see it as part of the mix. But if you ask me what our large, medium to long-term challenge is, it would be that we're a resilient economy that's prepared for a change in what we export to the world. Again, I think that's where Western Sydney steps in. We've got an explosion in the number of subcontinent community members who live in Western Sydney. It's difficult to speak in a stereotypical way, but I think I can say this without fear of contradiction. Incredibly entrepreneurial, incredibly hardworking, multilingual, and have business and cultural links with one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Yeah. And I don't think Australia's done this well in the past because this is a bit of a curse of resource-rich countries. If we can get this wave right, then in terms of exports, services and goods, it's so exciting, particularly for Western Sydney.
Couldn't agree more. We've talked about, and we heard tonight, and it was one of the sort of points that you made when coming into power around wanting to shore up delivery and making sure that it's great to have the big infrastructure, the big kit, but we need to make sure that they're functioning, that services are being delivered. And wanted to know at what point, and maybe you're at that point, but starting to look over the horizon the next 5 to 10 years. Christopher's talked through some of those projects already. Is there a point where you've started, or maybe you already have, looking at what's next and what that might look like, or are we still in that sort of steady phase and consolidation and making sure that things are in order and then we'll get there? Whereabouts in that cycle do you think we are?
Well, look, I mean, I think my colleagues and myself, the government that we're in, is really focused on being straight with everyone we possibly can about the challenges in the economy. And just as I said earlier, a lot of businesses find it difficult to get the labour that they need to finish the contracts on time and on money. The government's got exactly the same problems. At the same time as we want manufacturing to boom in Western Sydney, we want to spend more than we've ever spent before on public transport infrastructure, and we want to build more houses per year than we ever have in the history of the state. It's very difficult to do all those things at the same time. There is capacity constraints, and I don't want to be in a situation where we promise the world and deliver an atlas in 2 or 4 or 6 years' time. I think there's a way through it, but it does involve sequencing the works and being honest about what's capable and what can be delivered when. It's one of the leading reasons why we're such big supporters of the Rose Hill change, is because we see almost a twofer. Public transport infrastructure going in, massive investment from the state, and you've got land readily available for new housing and exciting neighbourhoods and opportunities. So you can expect more of that from us. And it doesn't mean completely rewriting Sydney. It means that you've got, yes, denser communities closer to the city, but that's what you have in Barcelona and London and Paris and New York. And a bit more of that flavour for Australia's only international city, in my view, is the only way that we can grow within our budget sustainably and provide housing for young people. So I don't want to put a dampener on anything. I love the ideas that bubble up, particularly in Western Sydney. I think the opportunities for this part of the country are massive and growing, but we're going to be realistic about what can be delivered and when. And hopefully the corollary of that is that when we say we're going to complete something, you can take it to the bank.
We've got a bunch of ideas, mate. Christopher Brown's got him in his pocket. Roll them out at any time. One final one. It's often a time for reflection, looking back on the year that was. For you, personally, professionally, looking back now, are there things that you look to and go, yeah, that was pretty cool, I'm glad I did that, or yeah, maybe that could have done that better? What's your reflection piece for 2024?
I haven't had time to reflect. I don't know. Look, it's a grind at the moment, I'll be honest, as we get towards the end of the year and we're working through some very complicated industrial disputes. So they're not easy. I'm just going to level with everyone, be completely honest. But if we can land there and make some good progress, that'd be a good Christmas. But yeah, both sides drive a hard bargain, and I think that's what taxpayers would expect of me.
Onwards and upwards. Premier, thank you for your time. We're going to award the Project of the Year award, so stay with me. But ladies and gentlemen, please thank the New South Wales Premier.
Thank you.